Welcome to Name 3 Songs. I'm Sarah Fagan.
I'm Jenna Million, and this is a podcast where we take the piss and debunk music fan stereotypes. Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
And if you stick around long enough, we'll also let you in on some new music the girls are already crazy about.
So Sarah, what are we talking about today?
We're discussing Fangirls, Scenes from Modern Music Culture by Hannah Ewens, which is honestly a gift. And I think should just be probably taught in schools at this point, just so people know that they're not crazy. Mandatory reading for grade 10.
Younger than that, fangirls need to know they're valid in their emotions and opinions.
Mandatory reading, grade 7.
Anytime you turn into a fangirl, this book is automatically sent to your house.
It'll be like the Karen Keeping of You by American Girl and Fangirls by Hannah Ewens.
Oh my goodness. So yes, this book was highly recommended to us. Everyone has said good things. Now that we've read it, we definitely appreciate all the good things. We have lots of fun tidbits and interesting topics to dive into. And I think it's, for me, this book is like, we've touched on like so many of these topics here and there. And this is truly like a subject. There's just so many different niches we could, go down with this. And for me, reading this book, there was a lot of things of like either thoughts or emotions that I had that I hadn't really put into words before, that Hannah like put into words really well. And it was just very exciting because I was able to like identify a lot with this and realize like certain emotions and things that like I hadn't considered before.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because like when we were like planning for this episode, I was like, yeah, we've like touched on so much that's in here, but at the same time, like we haven't had the ability to like go into depth in the same way because like, as I say 1,000 times, like the icebergs are so big and we can only talk about so much in like under an hour. So we're going to try and like discuss some of the bigger themes that we think are important and just revisit our favorite gals, the fangirls of But honestly, like this is a thing also, and I feel like the book kind of acknowledges that like fangirls it doesn't mean just girls anymore. It means anybody who cares about music in like an intense way. And I think it's just the like slow reclaiming of like a word that the media has used to make us feel bad about ourselves, and instead it's like, no, we're all fangirls and there's nothing wrong with it, which I think brings us really to like the first big topic that hit Jenna and I really hard in this, is that there's like a chapter about like sex icons. And so there's 2 chapters in this book that are called sex and iPhones and rock and roll, and the first section of this is fuck me daddy, or screaming obscenities at objects of desire. And this chapter hit me personally because a lot of it was about Pete Wentz.
And slash fiction.
Yeah, and slash fiction, which is going to have its own episode someday. I am currently constantly doing research on this topic, so just prepare yourselves for a very well thought out episode about about that. So Jenna and I spoke about this just on our own without really the book leading us, because when we were doing the One Direction episodes, Jenna was like, yeah, I didn't even think One Direction was cute. But I've also said the same thing, but I just didn't say it on the podcast. But I think I did, because I was like, oh, like I was older than them, so it felt weird being like, oh, they're cute, because I was like, no, like I shouldn't, because we were so close in age, but because I was like older, I was like, this I feel this is wrong, because it wasn't like, oh, they're like adorable. It was like, no, they're like being fed to me as like sex symbols, and I don't know how to take this. But as women who work in media, it's really hard, and it talks about this in the book, but it's really hard to like acknowledge that you have a crush on these people that you're supposed to be like kind of viewing as colleagues in a way. Because I mean, it's obviously different because there's still that sort of like hierarchy of artist to journalist, but there's supposed to be that like mutual respect. And while it's like acceptable to interview like Sam Fender and be like, I really like your music, it's not acceptable to interview Sam Fender and be like, you look like a Roman god statue. No matter how much you're thinking it.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely professionally, we've had to kind of put our like emotions in check when it comes to that stuff. But I think like for context, backing it up a little bit, she kind of outlines in the book, while mainstream culture became sexualized in like the 1960s, counterculture was proclaiming it as socially acceptable to have sex outside of marriage. There was like contraceptives, there was like first wave of feminism, all this stuff. And yet teen girls were still expected to be perfectly pure. And like this, oh my gosh, this archetype goes back years in history. Forever we've had this archetype of like the pure, like the teenage virgin and all this stuff. And then she goes on to say how just like the acts of like fangirldom, you know, which is kind of like, you know, screaming, fainting, dashing around in mobs, tweeting obscenities at your favorite person. All of this is, in a way, it's protesting like the sexual repressiveness. She says that it's protesting the sexual repressiveness of rigid double standards of female teen culture, which I think is just very interesting. So like a lot of, you know, music is sexual, and like there's so many musicians, like basically every musician has been like marketed as a sex symbol in one way or another at one point in time or another. But she says when it comes to enjoying music in a sexualized way, it's deemed socially unacceptable, illegitimate, and not serious. And so this is the whole thing of like, hey, here's a sex symbol, bye, like be seduced. But like, actually you can't be seduced. Like in real life, you're not allowed to be seduced. You're not allowed to express your sexual desires or any of that.
Yeah, it's like, don't talk about it. And that was a thing where like I was reading the chapter and I was like sort of like nodding, but there is like the one thing that really hit me where she said, like I was saying earlier, where she's like, female music lovers frequently deny their sexual attraction to the musicians. And it's that thing where it's like, I feel like I keep doing this where I'm like, oh, social media, but I feel like social media has made it like more acceptable to be like, oh yeah, like I want to like hook up with this person, or the whole like thirst tweet things where it's like stomp on my neck, like that sort of thing. But like before that, like I feel like it was kind of embarrassing because like my whole bedroom, like as a teen, was just like plastered with like posters from like J14 or like
Me too.
pages I pulled out of Rolling Stone. And it wasn't only guys, like I had like a huge Megan Fox poster in my room because I loved her, and like Avril Lavigne and like that sort of thing. And it's just these people I like looked up to and was like, these people are so cool or whatever. But there was also like a wall of just like swoopy hair blonde boys from Disney Channel. So like taste, who knows what that is. But it's still that thing where it's like was always viewed sort of as weird when you're like, oh yeah, like I no. So like I was like in love with Jesse McCartney when I was a kid, and I was like, this man is my husband. Like he is a white boy of the decade. Like he's my everything. Like I had a LiveJournal username that was Sarah McCartney because of Jesse McCartney, and people on LiveJournal were like, you really like the Beatles? And I was like, no, I don't. I really like Jesse McCartney. And I like posters of him. And then when there weren't enough I would print photos of him out on the internet, and then I would collage them together onto construction paper and like hang them up in my room. And I was like, on one of them, which I found once we moved, I wrote on the bottom of the poster, like, this is when I think I'm going to marry Jesse McCartney.
Oh, that's precious.
But I was like never embarrassed about it. I think I literally made like iron-on t-shirts of photos of him. Like I had a problem. But like as I got older, it was just that thing where I was like, maybe I need to tone this down and like not.
She makes this point in the book about like girls often have, you know, posters covering their room of like their idols, and men don't do the same thing. They don't go through the same emotions there. And I think like this is a reason why, and we actually touched on this in the episode with Sophia when we were talking about being young and female in the music industry, and you kept saying like women view music so differently than men. And I think this is why, is like there's different levels and different ways to love music, but it's so different for teen girls, like having such adoration for like these artists when you're growing up and such passion about it. And that's something that not all men have experienced in the same way that like fangirls have.
Well, I think also it's like the music that we're sort of fed by like MTV or the radio or whatever when we're young is obviously like your parents play music around the house, so you're going to listen to other things than like the pop music. But I mean, like when I was a kid, we listened to Radio Disney, or we listened to like my dad's like rock music sort of stuff. And it's like when you're listening to Radio Disney, almost everything on that is very just like white boys singing about how much they love girls, and like not in the way where like Fall Out Boy's kind of derogatory towards women, or like maybe it's a gay thing, who knows. Who knows? But like those sort of things where it's like in pop punk, like the music that I listened to once I sort of aged out of like the swoopy hair blonde boys, it was more sort of like it's going over your head what they're actually saying.
Mhm.
Whereas the music that you're first fed into is that like these men are like fully devoted to the woman that they're singing the song about. But as
Mhm.
like a 10-year-old girl listening to Jesse McCartney sing Beautiful Soul, you're like, I am his beautiful soul. Like,
Yeah.
this is for me. Whereas I feel like guys, there's like a disservice to guys in that there are no real like songs that are available for them to feel the way we feel when we hear
True.
those, because like even like when I'm thinking about like the girls who would sing pop songs when I was young, so like all those girl groups, it's always about a guy doing them wrong. It's never really about like their like love and affection like to these men. So guys don't have that. Like young boys aren't listening to music as they're coming to age and being like, oh, like girls love me undyingly, whereas I'm like, this swoopy hair blonde boy would die for me.
Yeah.
So
That's so interesting because so much of it has to do with the patriarchy and like truly, I mean, if you think about it, it's like, I don't know, it's just interesting. Like you're saying, it's like, why is that? Is it because like women can't be in power where boys are like obsessed with them in that way? But then at the same time, like when they grow up and are being misogynist, like what's going on here?
well, I think it's, and I mean, this might be a stretch, it might be a conspiracy theory, so let's put on our tin hats for a second. But I think it's just the whole underlying theme of trying to brainwash girls into being like subservient to men, and that it's like, oh, like this is what this is what my goal should be, is to have a man love me this much so that I just want to be his housewife, you know?
Oh yeah,
So
exactly.
so that's what
It's
it
all
is
misogyny.
this, yeah, it's all, everything is underlying misogyny, and that's the thing. And I feel like that's also why we're fed on the radio that sort of pop music towards young people, because it's like those are the rooms where the old men making the decisions of what they're going to brainwash people to feel and think are being like, okay, these are what we're writing about. So like women hate men, or they've been scorned by men, and then like these like young teen men like love women undyingly until they don't anymore. So like we're gonna like give girls this like false sense of like what they should be wanting, and then they'll go into the real world and they won't have it, and they'll become Sarah.
Yes, because all of the stories, all of the media, all of the writers in the songwriting room are old men. And guess what? They think that women want the like what they want. That's not true. And she talks about this in this book too. So I would like to say thank you for this beautifully hot take, Sarah. Coming from the Opinionation Station.
Anytime, the Opinionation Station is always open. But I think that that is interesting also because, and like another theme that she brings into in the book, there's a chapter about like Ariana Grande and the Manchester terrorism attack, and there's a conversation about how Ariana Grande went from like this cookie cutter like Nickelodeon TV show girl to somebody who is very impressive, honestly, who like writes her own music and is very in touch with like her like self as a sexual person, and she writes music about it, and it's in a very empowering, not uncomfortable sort of way. And she is very outspoken about like her political views and all these sort of things, which I just think is really impressive. And I think it's been like a bigger theme over the past like 5, maybe 10 years, if we really want to push it out there, of women just owning their like sexuality and like their persona instead of allowing other people to be like, tone it down. Like, you gotta stop.
Yeah, I mean, in Taylor Swift's documentary, there's a whole section about that, you know, how she wanted to speak out politically, and her whole team was like, no, don't do it, don't do it. Like, it's gonna hurt sales, like all this stuff. And she's like, I have to do this. And we're at a point, like a reckoning, where women are like taking control of like their beliefs and their own power and putting it out there, being like, too bad, this is who I am.
Well, back to like our music meltdown episode where we were talking about like bands we avoided or musicians we avoided the bandwagon on. I think also personally a reason why I was kind of avoidant of like Taylor Swift was because I was like, this bitch is a Republican. Like, I'm like, she wants us to not have rights. She hates everything. Because I just felt like anything before this past like this 2 or 3 years, it just felt like, oh, she's doing it to be performative so that people leave her alone. But now it's like, oh no, everything else was performative. That was who she really is. But like I think they did her so dirty and like not letting her just be who she wanted to be, because there is that like preconceived notion of like country artists and artists like that they are like
conservative.
Yeah. And so it's really easy to just avoid someone because you're trying to be girl power, but how can you be girl power when like being a conservative means you don't want girls to have rights? It's just that whole thing is real dangerous, I think.
Nonetheless, Ariana Grande, a beautifully powerful woman.
So basically, the chapter, as I said, is mostly about the terrorist attack in Manchester, which was in 2016. And it happened at an Ariana Grande show, and 22 people died. And the vast majority of the people at that show were preteen and teen girls and like gay men, which is like the usual demographic of pop music is teen, preteen girls, and gay men, which is honestly all the world really needs to survive. But so the main 2 points is that there was the undiscussed topic that this was an act of terror against girls empowering themselves, and then also how survivors dealt with their love of music moving forward after having such a horrible thing happen during something that's supposed to be a safe space and something that makes you feel good. But I think that the main thing that I found really incredible and empowering is that Hannah No Holds Bar was like, this was an act of terror against women empowering themselves. And I remember when this happened, there was like a Take That show like the night or two before. And like, I was just like, no, they could have, like, he could have done this at any other point. Like, that venue had events literally every single night. But the fact that in that month they picked like an Ariana Grande show was like trying to prove a point to women. And I just think it's really incredible that Hannah was like, yeah, this is what happened.
So she interviews this man, Nazir Afzal, who was a former chief crown prosecutor for Northwest England. And so he was like the one to call it out as gender terrorism. Yeah. And it's defined as reinforcing gender stereotypes aimed at keeping women in their place. And while she talks to him, he said like not a lot, like basically no officials agreed with this. And very, very few journalists even bothered to point this out either. Mm-hmm. And he goes on to say gender terrorism pervades every society, although men never call it that because it would then mean that a national and international response is needed. So that's really powerful. The fact that he's calling it out and saying like people don't want to recognize this because it would be an international response to gender terrorism.
Yeah. Well, he quit his job because of it, because they wouldn't let him talk about it.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's really admirable, but also kind of sad that he had to quit his job because they were like, no, sir. And I mean, Hannah acknowledges that it took a year for anybody in media to talk about it. On the year anniversary, this woman named Anna Letskovich, I want to say, for an English outlet called The New Statesman, she wrote an article about it. And Hannah acknowledges that an article like this is usually picked up by other news outlets and sort of utilized as clickbait because people will be like, oh, like this is a topic people are interested in. We want to be the site that people go on to read this, even though it wasn't our initial thought. And nobody ran with it. So it was the 1 year anniversary and only one site acknowledged that it was gender terrorism and nobody else did. And I just think that something like that is just it's kind of disappointing because I feel like in some senses I can kind of understand maybe not talking about it when it first happened because it makes it scarier for everybody. But I think at a year mark, it's something that it's like, why this, like, it's so easy for news outlets to be like, why they are like, why this wasn't acknowledged, you know? Like my mindset would be like, don't mention something like that when it first happens because you want these girls to heal. Like you want these like teen girls who witness something horrific to be able to like go back out and do things without the fear of like another terrorist attack happening. Because like these, like when I was a teenager, I like, as I said in like our episode with Sophia, like I just was so blinded because I thought everything was just like girls run music, because that was like the world that I lived in when I first started getting involved in it. And so if that had happened when I was a teenager, and then like the next day all the news outlets were like terror attack because men, like terrorists don't want women to feel empowered, I think I would be too terrified to ever leave my house ever again.
Yeah, it is a very scary thing. Like just the thought of that is very, very terrifying. I definitely was like also very sheltered from like thinking that would ever happen, ever happen.
It's just insane that like, and this is a thing, it's like I feel like so many women and like young girls don't realize how powerful they really are. And if anything, that terrorist attack should prove how powerful our voices really are, because like a terror organization was so afraid of a bunch of teen girls that they're like, we gotta kill them. And that's just fucked up, that they're like, oh, like women cannot feel this empowered, women cannot feel like they can talk about themselves being sexual beings. And it's like, why? And like in a less serious note, it's the same thing as like when men have the double standard of like, I don't want my girl to like sleep with more than 5 guys. Whereas like when they're with their guys, they're like, oh yeah, I like fucked 3 girls in one night. And it's like, that's like a way less serious
Double standards all
version.
over the place. What did I say? This the archetype of women having to be pure virgin for men.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And I feel like that's just a very common underlying theme, like within music, of like, oh, like, why are they wearing this outfit on stage? Like, why are they doing this? And it's like, they're like singing and dancing and like doing these things. Of course, they're going to basically be wearing a bikini up on stage. Like,
the thing that I struggle with a lot when it comes to that is it's like on one hand, like women want to take power for their sexuality and like how they want to dress and like empower themselves in doing that. But at the same time, you have so many men like ogling at them and like being like, this is exactly what they want. And it's so gross that I never know like personally where I fall in all of that, because I don't want to be like, I want to be powerful, but I don't want to also be ogled at by men. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
No, it completely makes sense. And I feel like Billie Eilish is like having that problem in that she was like, I mean, and that's the thing, like when you come to fame at the age that Billie Eilish is coming to like was coming to fame at, it's like your body's changing, things are changing. Like you don't want to be like overly sexualized when you're underage, number one. And so she was like, you know what, I'm gonna make my brand the fact that I'm gonna wear like oversized, like cool sweatsuits and like do this thing. And she did something that in my mind, even I just was like, oh, like this is just who she is. Whereas everyone's like, oh, she's trying to not sexualize herself, which didn't even come to my mind really, because I was like, she's just picked a fashion choice to be like her staple, which I thought was very smart. But I guess that's just me being like,
It's something so simple that I think has a lot of power in this day and age when the
mm-hmm.
media just wants to sexualize everyone and everything, especially when it comes to music, as we've mentioned. I
Yeah.
think it was her personal choice to do that because she knew like the media would do that to her. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so powerful for a lot of like teens who are growing up and like figuring out their gender identity, figuring out how they want to like represent themselves, how they want to dress, and like knowing that you don't have to dress one way or another just because it's going to like because you're going to be more attractive or like whatever it is. I think it's such a small thing that she did that's like going to have a really big impact for years to come.
No, definitely. But I mean, also, like, once she turned like 18 and she kind of like started acknowledging that like people were like talking about that and like trying to sexualize her, like trying to find photos of her. There was like a recent thing of like her out in like a tank top, and people were like, oh, like Billie Eilish has like a mom bod or something. I'm like, she's 18 years old. Leave her alone. But also, like, that's not your business. And like all these things where it's just like, how dare you? Like this girl is like one of the most talented, impressive people in music right now. And how dare you try and minimize her to her body? Like
Yeah.
it's so, so fucked up. And like, I don't know. I like the body image thing can again be a whole freaking episode, but I just think it's insane that it's like, oh, like she doesn't want to sexualize herself, so what, now we're gonna sexualize her. And then when people like Ariana sexualize themselves, they're like, she's sexualizing herself too much. And
Exactly.
it's like, what do you want us to
The
do?
double standard.
It's like, I don't understand it. It's like, it's not Billie Eilish's fault that she is built the way that she's built. Like, you shouldn't hold it against her that she's like just a normal teenage girl.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. And that's the other thing too, is it's like the unhealthy like body norms of like the media world. Like, don't even let this teen girl look like a healthy teenage girl without being like, oh, she's looking chunky. And it's like, fuck off.
Like, absolutely fuck off.
Like, I just don't. Yeah, so I mean, it like obviously it's like a whole different like caliber to what's going on, but it's just like these ideals of like what men think women should be, and like the different horrific ways that they handle it, from like from like harassing people on Twitter to an all out like terror attack, is fucking disgusting and insane. Because that's the thing, is it's like, obviously, like, I don't know what they're told wherever like that terrorist, but that kid was from England, so I don't know what he's like being fed into of like what's like okay and what isn't okay and like all that sort of thing. But it's like the media plays a way bigger part in this than they ever are willing to admit. Because if the media weren't out here like demonizing women for like having tits, like they're like, we would be in a bit of a less scary world, I think.
I mean, this is what we come back to episode after episode after episode, is what the media has said.
Yeah.
Because it's like literally straight off the bat, One Direction versus the media, like all these awful things the media says. But this is why it's just so comical to me. It's like, why? Why? Like, what would our world look like if the media wasn't saying these awful things?
And they change their tune quite often, which is ridiculous. And it's like, it's disheartening for me as somebody who my whole life all I've ever wanted to be was like work in music journalism. And then like as you grow up and start to work in different sectors of journalism and stuff, and you just realize that like there are literal people who are in media because they want to bring people down. It's crazy because like I understand the need for these things, and I understand like the human interest in like these things. Obviously, like I want to work in media, I do work in media, like I understand it, but I just feel like it's completely unnecessary to like take people down. And just like the different ways that sort of celebrities go about handling these things, I think are quite interesting too, which I think also can bring us to our next topic, which is Lady Gaga. Because Lady Gaga, my remembrance of the history of Lady Gaga was that she came out as like a persona rather than herself, because she had been like made fun of and like made to feel like she wasn't good enough. And so it was like, who is she? And I think that there were like, I feel like they mentioned this in the book, but weren't there like rumors about like what is she? Like, is she a woman? Is she a man? Like, what is going on here? And it's like, I don't know if that was a narrative that she wanted. Maybe. I don't know what she was going after, but I just mean like the fact that there even is that narrative of like, what is she? And it's like, Lady Gaga. Like,
having to figure, yes. I mean, this goes so much into like gender and sexuality, of like trying to put someone into a box and then like talking about them because you don't know what box they fit into. It's just like, just leave them alone. They're just a person. You know, at the end of the day, they're a person, you're a person. You don't have to push your norms onto people. You don't have to make them fit into any box. And I think that this chapter was so interesting, and it starts off with a quote: "The Gaga body has always been central to Gaga, the concept. She's a living, breathing performance, piece of art, and of wonder and revulsion." And so this is to your point of like people trying to figure out like, what is she? And like the amazing range of costumes she's had at different red carpets. She's always like, she's playing into this. It is like performance art for her, which is really cool way for her to express herself. And also it's just been so interesting watching how, like you said, the media is like trying to fit her into a piece. Like, what is she?
And I think that like because of this, Lady Gaga like came out and was like something bigger than just music. Like there was like a whole thing there. Like it was a whole thing to unpack. I think that that made it more comfortable for the type of fans that she wanted to attract and for the type of fans that she has attracted to find her and find solace in her, and thus bring us to the topic at hand in the conversation, is that these people view Lady Gaga kind of like as this higher entity of sorts. And I think that that was her plan the whole time, to sort of create this persona where it's like you sort of know who she is as a person. Like I feel like, as I love to bring everything back to Harry Styles, like I feel honestly like maybe we know more about Lady Gaga as a person than we know about Harry Styles as a person, even though Lady Gaga's whole thing is being a piece of performance art. And I just find it really interesting that somebody can both be a piece of performance art and also be such an open book, and so like willing to let her fans in. And so that's what just really resonated me with this chapter, is that like her fans just like view her as this like all encompassing like other thing.
Yeah. And they said about meeting her, like she's both like so down to earth, but also otherworldly, extraordinary, and very like godlike.
Yeah, I mean, a common underlying theme is that they all want to be able to look her in the eye, because they have, there's multiple, at this point it feels like folklore, honestly.
I know. I loved this chapter. I love this chapter because of the way she's talked about, like, it's, I don't know, to me it's so captivating.
Yeah, well, I mean, these fans are saying like she looked me in the eyes and suddenly I knew who I was.
Yeah.
And it's like nobody that I'm a fan of could ever do that for me.
I know, it's so powerful. I'm like in awe. I think it's really interesting that she gives so much to her fans. And like the book talks about it, how she'll always, you know, attempt to go out and sign autographs, take photos when she can, and do her meet and greets, and how she always, it's like she's like projecting like this version of herself that everyone knows, and they're always trying to like have like a piece of that. And it talks about how she went through a lot of hard stuff and like had to like kind of step away from the light and step away from touring and like meet and greets for a while, and just like the effects of like her body not being able to handle everything. And there's even like Justin Bieber's in here saying that he stopped doing meet and greets because it was like emotionally and mentally draining. And so I can't even imagine like what she goes through to like project that persona like all the time when she's interacting with fans. And it is, in that way, it is very like otherworldly for someone to be able to do that all the time.
Well, I think also, and it's something that we talked about in like the toxic fandom thing, is it's like fans some like expect these artists to be like their therapists in that sort of sense, and so they'll put really heavy shit on these people. And so I understand, especially people like Justin Bieber, who's very clearly been through the ringer in public. It's like it must be really hard when you're publicly going through the ringer and then having to go do a meet and greet and somebody being like, yeah, my dad died and like this song really helped me, or like, yeah, like this horrible thing happened to me. And it's like, you live with that.
I think that's why so many major musicians step away from like the light after a while. Like they have a period of like, I just need to figure out who I am. I just need to be me, because they're constantly giving so much to so many people. And there was also a quote that I want to bring around to. So she was saying of the fans, like they want confirmation from Gaga that they are good enough, and that Gaga is probably the only one in their lives that voices that. So this goes back to the therapy thing of like, for someone who's like, you know, struggling a lot with, you know, whatever it is, if you don't have anyone in your life that like supports you, believes in you, that can be that confident for you, then you're like holding on to this idol for that reason. And like, oh, it talked about how like a lot of times like she like they said, you look into her eyes and you know who you are, or at least you know the very minimal, you at least you know you're safe, or like you're valid as a person. And I think that's so amazing for an artist to do that for people, especially like on the scale of someone like Lady Gaga. But on the other side of it, like you say, it does take away a lot from them as a human being.
It's just that thing that I've always found really interesting and like didn't realize until I like started getting involved in music and like making friends and bands and stuff, and seeing sort of how taxing things can be on them. And you realize like, oh shit, like these are real people who are getting put through the ringer. But I mean, the thing that really struck me in the book was like the juxtaposition between the two main fans that Hannah interviewed, and that like one fan was like angry that Lady Gaga was like canceling tours and canceling meet and greets and all these things, and was like, I'm owed this, whereas the other fan was like, she gives us so much, like we'll wait outside her hotel and she'll send down hot chocolate, she'll do these things for us all the time, like I've had the pleasure of like meeting her once, like if she needs a break, like we know that she needs a break. And it was sort of that whole thing where she's like, sometimes like the fan who was on the side of like, yeah, Lady Gaga needs to be allowed to have space. She was like, from what we like know about her or whatever, like sometimes I think that we understand her more than the people in her life do, which I think is a stretch, but I understand like where she's coming from, because it's like they know so much, they put in so much work and research into finding out like about this art, like an artist that they love so dearly, whereas like this other fan's like, I had 7 shows planned, how dare she? And it's like, sweetie. Like my thought on that is always like, if an artist stops touring, you always have their music. Like that's the thing, is it's like, unlike TV shows or things like that, when like a TV show stops, it's like, yes, you can revisit a show, but I feel like a show, like a TV show, doesn't do the same thing as music can. Whereas like if you listen to a Lady Gaga album at any point in your life, it can have, or any album really, I mean, like an album can have like a different effect on you depending on like what you need the album for at that moment.
Yeah.
So it's just like, if she needs a break, she needs a break. I feel like the whole thing of like not understanding that like artists need a personal, I don't know, because like fangirldom sort of like has a stereotype of what it means, which is just like overly obsessive, like stalker type situation of fans, where like the fans are always there, the fans are underfoot, the fans are screaming, they're yelling, they're being insane. And these 2 girls that Hannah interviews like show like the 2 different sides of like what being a fangirl can be like, which is being like super angry and but also still super attached, or just super supportive and super attached. But that's always what the media shows, is like the ones that are like, oh, they didn't come out to meet us, or like, oh, like I'd do anything for them. But the last 2 chapters in this book cover Amy Winehouse and Courtney Love, who I don't think any person outside of like being within the like being a super fan of those artists, I don't think that normal like everyday people would ever be like, oh, those artists have super fans.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't aware of either of them, to be honest.
I knew that Courtney Love had that, but I didn't really, I guess I just never thought about it with Amy, because like she just was here and gone so fast. But I found the Amy Winehouse chapter so interesting, because I love Amy Winehouse's music, but I don't think anybody would ever be like, Sarah loves Amy Winehouse. But I mean, the chapter about Amy I thought was really interesting, because obviously like she was like a very polarizing person within the media and the world and all that sort of thing, and there were always like paparazzi outside of her house. But in this chapter about her, they're talking about how like these female fans would go to Amy's house and buzz the intercom, and Amy would answer, and they would have conversations with her like outside her house. And I was like, this is the most, like, if I was ever going to imagine what Amy Winehouse was as a person, this was how I imagined her. And this is actually it, of like her being like chain smoking in her house, writing music and like answering phone calls from fans, because why not? Like,
yeah. I love the description of this, and like the fans who did get to meet her, like she would just stop and like chat with them like they were normal people. I mean, normal people, but like, you know, she would just stop and like chat with her fans and like have full-on conversations, and that's so incredible. And I think the thing that's really interesting about this chapter is the fans that Hannah talks to, they all say that like they felt like they have a personal relationship with Amy.
Even ones that never met her. And I think that that's what's so interesting and not talked about enough, of like females' connections to other female artists that aren't like these pop stars. Because like obviously like Amy was technically, I guess, a pop star, but like she didn't sing pop music. Like she sang a very specific type of music that has like a much clearer deep meaning than pop music does, because obviously pop music can have like very deep meanings, like obviously like that's not Like that's not up for debate, but I just mean like when music feels soulful and the way that Amy's music felt soulful, it's like it's a different way of connecting. Because it's not as common, I guess, to have like female artists doing music outside of pop, especially at that time. Um, because like this was like a decade ago, more than that. Like
Yeah. Early
um
2000s, I think.
yeah, like
Early mid
early, yeah,
2000s.
early mid 2000s. Yeah, so like at that time, like somebody creating music outside of the stereotype of pop, like that was female, was like not as common as it is now, I guess is the best way to
I
say
would say
it.
it was not as common to be as famous as she
Yeah, yeah,
was
yeah, that's what I
for
mean.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they, yeah, they talked very much where like there was just like deep and meaningful connection. And I just feel, and that they didn't feel the need to have like that fandom community like a lot of other like musical artist fans feel the need to have, because they were like, we know her, like she knows us. And that's what it feels like. It's like when these girls go to the house and they're talking and they're like, oh, like we can leave you alone. And Amy's like, oh no, like I love your accents. You're from Liverpool. Like I love that. Like let's chat. And then she like signed, like she's like, I'm not gonna come and take photos, but I'll sign. I have some photos of myself up here. I'll sign them for you. And they just like chatted over an intercom, and I love that.
I'm just thinking like back me personally and like my favorite most personal records and like for me, when I was a teenager, I got into like Jack's Mannequin, like
Mm-hmm.
almost post Jack's Mannequin era. Like I was very late to discovering Jack's Mannequin.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like immediately it just resonated with me. And then I went back and I listened through Something Corporate with,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Andrew McMahon is the overarching artist here. And like there's like a certain like Something Corporate album that is just like so dear to me. And like I could say like I feel like I have a personal relationship with that record and like
Yeah.
with what he wrote about. And I was never really part of the fandom. And because like Andrew McMahon is like a bit of an older artist and like a solo artist, I wouldn't say that he has a fandom or like it feels disconnected.
No,
But
he
to
did.
me, like,
He
well,
did.
yeah, exactly. But like the era
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I
yeah.
lived through, I wasn't a part of it because like Something Corporate era was very different because I missed that by like a good 10
Yeah.
years, 10, 15 years. And so like the person he is now, like I'm not a part of that fandom. But like that record is so personal to me and like still like his music, even his new stuff, like the way he writes, I just feel like a very personal connection to the way he writes. So I can
Yeah.
understand that in that sense.
Well, and also, I mean, I think that your thoughts on Andrew McMahon are thoughts that are shared, I think, with a lot of his fans. And that I think that there was definitely, like, especially around Something Corporate, like a fandom because it was like within that genre of music, like that sort
The
of,
like emo, it was like
yeah, like the emo
emo pop
thing.
punk era
Yeah.
basically.
But I mean, I just like I have a lot of people that have been in my life that Andrew McMahon was just like this super, like they felt like they had that sort of like connection that resonated with like the Amy fans.
I feel like the common theme here, and this also ties into the Courtney Love story, is that all like these people are very raw and very
Mm-hmm.
real and they let a lot into their lyrics and the way their music is this very like it cuts straight to the center.
Yeah.
And the same thing for Courtney Love.
I mean, I just really love acknowledging that like you can be a super fan without having any caveats to it. Because I think you and I both have said multiple times that like we haven't been part of a fandom for so long, and sometimes it feels like we don't. And I feel like this ties in really well with the conversation about Courtney Love. Is like sometimes you feel like you don't belong, or like your love of something isn't as worthy because you don't exist within that bubble on the internet, because the internet is so powerful within that. And I found the Courtney Love conversation chapter so interesting because it's mainly older women that Hannah's like talking about, and how like they didn't have, there was no social media, so like fandom obviously has like grown and changed with the decades and with the internet and all that sort of thing. But it was like hard to find people that had that common interest of listening to like Courtney's band Hole. And like because it's kind of like a punk grunge like sort of band, like it's very specific like type of people who like it. So it's not as common to like come up in conversation. Whereas
Yeah.
like you drive by and maybe see like a poster of like Harry Styles or whoever, you know? It just was really interesting because they were talking about how they started like a Facebook group and that they had found all these like older women who were all super into like just love Courtney Love and their connection to her and why they were connected to her and how they hadn't ever had that before. And I feel like it just really made me feel a bit better in like the way that I love music because like I think that just as a journalist, I was like, oh, like I feel like I don't belong in fandom. So fandom has scared me. And so reading these like Courtney Love fans like later in life finding each other through Facebook, I just thought is really interesting because like you don't ever think about like older female fans of
Yeah.
music.
And I think the thing with that is like we've touched on this before. She, outlines how like these women have like, again, they grew up with this record and like Courtney Love, like you said, a very specific type of fan. What she wrote about, very specific. And she was also hated by the
Yeah.
media. People hated her. So, I mean, the women who were fans of Hole like connected to those records in a very specific, deep way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think becoming adults, I've said this before, like you just don't have as much time to be as invested as you are when you're a teen. You don't have time to like go to multiple tour dates or wait outside ahead of time, stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that it's any less special to you. And one of the ladies in the book said like it's like she'll just put on that record like whenever she's doing anything, like just around the
Yeah.
house. Like she just always puts it on. And I think that's so special to be able to have that relationship with music, like those records that meant something to you as a teen, like you'll always have them. You'll always be able to go back to them, whether or not you're actively showing that you're a fan. And I think when you meet someone who's like, with the Amy Winehouse example, it was like somebody had like an Amy tattoo. It's like when
Yeah.
you meet someone and you see they have that tattoo, it's like, like there's going to be like a really cool, deep connection there because like
Yeah.
there's so the fans are like more incognito, they're harder to find, but like when
Yeah.
you come across it in real life, it's like a really special connection.
Yeah. And I think also like with that girl who had the Amy Winehouse tattoo, she was like, you can tell the difference because somebody will be like, oh, I love Amy Winehouse, and they'll be like Valerie, or somebody will be like, oh, that's a really beautiful Amy portrait, and you like know the difference of like where they're
Yeah.
coming from and like what kind of
Yeah.
conversation to have, which I think is really incredible and says a lot about like that personal relationship that they feel like they have. Um, but I think that my most like interested takeaway from the Courtney Love thing was Hannah talking about how when you think about older music fans as always the stereotypical kind of like gross old white man, and you never think of these like badass women who still love music with all their soul. And I think that's kind of sad because, as I always say, women built the house, men just stole it from us. But but like she says that it's like when there is like the man stereotype of like an old music fan, even if there is a woman in tow, you always are like, oh, that's like the begrudging partner, when probably that woman maybe even introduced that man to that band, you
Yeah.
know? And I just feel like we need to rewrite history. We need to fix this. And I just feel like it's really important. And I think that it's just the whole thing of sort of like men stealing music from us. Like, I know that's really ridiculous and really far fetched, but I just think that, like, but not because I mean, as we've said a million times, men have claimed the Beatles. Men now are like, wait, One Direction have bops. Men are like, Harry Styles wrote a rock album. Let's respect Harry Styles. And it's like we can't let that happen again. We can let, they're allowed to like it. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I just think that in like this chapter of being like we never think of like older women fans of music, it's like that should be what we think about when we think
Yeah.
about older people liking music. It shouldn't be like a
I
drunk
think
dad.
Yeah, I think it so much plays into the patriarchy once again of like women grow up, you get married, you have children, you have a job and you dedicate to your job or you're dedicated to your children. You don't have time for yourself as a personal time. And like men are just like doing whatever they want and like having their jobs and like maybe caring about their children. And it's just like everything falls to the women to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Fuck the patriarchy.
Well, there was one woman in that chapter who said that like she was lucky because she was single, and so she
Yeah.
was like, so she's like, I am still allowed by society to
She was like, yeah,
dedicate
I'm
my
lucky that I'm
time,
not married and I don't have kids
yeah,
because I
to
have time to go to concerts on the weekends,
yeah, and I'm like,
which is
that's
ridiculous.
so, because I'm like, if my, because like my mom's not a huge music fan, but like if my mom had been, I thought would have thought it was so cool if my mom was like, I love this artist, I'm gonna take you to their concert.
Mm.
Like that's so awesome, and I think it's so depressing that the world has made women think that they have to stop having a personality once they find a man.
Yep.
But yeah, the a perfect book is perfect.
In conclusion, perfect book is perfect. In conclusion, go buy Fangirls. We would love to hear your thoughts on it. And I'm sure we are going to reference this in so many more of our conversations because everything, reoccurring themes, everything overlaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really powerful, and like the fangirl conversation will never stop. It's like the underlying theme of everything we talk about is like how important women are within the industry in all aspects. I feel like fans don't realize how important they are, but we all need to realize that like we are pretty fucking important when it all boils
I
down to
think,
it.
in all fairness, I think BTS fans are realizing how
Oh,
important they are.
that is true. I
We
think
need
that,
more
yeah.
women empowering themselves in this way.
Yeah, it's just it's very important to realize like how powerful we really are and how much control we really have over everything. But that's like in there's another chapter about like Japanese pop bands, and they are aware, like the people who create this are aware of how powerful the fans are and how much the fans want to be a part of it. And so they were talking about how they do these things of like, oh, like if you buy like this, like there'll be like 6 versions of a single coming out, and it's like depending on which version you buy, like this artist will have like a solo, or like this person who's like not always in the band will get to be in the band, or like I don't 100% understand how it works, but that's what it was. But it was like, yes, they're forcing them to put their money where their mouth is, but at the same time these fans are like, we want to be in control, so we're going to give you our money and then we're going to throw away the 30 CDs we just bought because it doesn't matter, we just wanted to have our voices heard. And so yeah, so I just think that we've proven, like girls have proven in other countries how powerful they are, and I think that we just need to keep doing it. And that's a lot of like what I got out of the book, is just how important we really are and how many different ways we love music, and how it's completely acceptable to love music in whatever way you do, whether that be wanting Harry Styles to step on your neck, wanting nobody to know you love Harry Styles, or like there's so many calibers of it. So don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not loving music in the right way, because there's no right or wrong way to do it. If you feel a personal connection to an artist and you don't feel the need to like have other fans validate that, then you don't need to. And I feel like that's really an important takeaway.
Absolutely. And we are back with Band of the Week in 30 seconds or less. Sarah's going to take it away in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, my band this week is Yannicka, which it took me 30 minutes to figure out how to pronounce that, but that's fine. They're a British rock group with a female front lady, and she is fucking badass. I love this band. My favorite song is Punch Bag, which I think, according to their Spotify, makes me very just not. It's their top played song, so I'm not special, but it's a really good song. I don't know. I just feel like it's very empowering listening to this band. I feel like I could take on the world anytime I listen to them. As always, come chat with us if you have read it or if you have thoughts about the conversation. I feel like there are a few chapters we haven't touched on that we'll probably definitely touch on in a later date. So if you read the book, or even if you didn't, and you have more thoughts about Fangirls, you can talk about them all day, every day. So come chat with us on Twitter at Name3Songs, or personally at Sarah_Fagan and at Jenna_million. So Thank you guys for joining us this week on Name 3 Songs. Until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.
And remember, you're never too cool to listen to Harry Styles.
Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes come out, and leave us a 5-star review. They really help.
If you want to find out more about any of the sources we referenced in this episode, you can visit name3songs.com.